everyone, and welcome to March's Comfort Book Club discussion of The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame. As always, I'm joined by my mum, Donna.
Hello, everybody.
And we're both really looking forward to this discussion, aren't we?
Yes, a great favourite.
Yes, and thank you to everyone who sent in a voice message to contribute to our discussion this month. We had lots of messages, and I'm going to actually change a little bit the rules regarding sending in a voice message. So you'll hear more about that at the end of this video. But for now, I just want to get going with the discussion. So The Wind in the Willows is a real favourite of ours. And it's one that we really enjoyed rereading. It's a true comfort read for us. So it's a book that we've returned to many times over the years. But what was lovely was hearing from some people who had never read the book before. And Lindsay sent in a message saying that she really enjoyed reading the book, and also that it's inspired her to read a bit more fiction, as she normally only reads non-fiction. So let's hear Lindsay's message.
Hi Miranda and Donna, this is Lindsay from Washington State in the US. It's been so long since I've read fiction, and it's been so nice to come back to it with the Comfort Book Club and The Wind in the Willows. It's really sparked my imagination. I'm also a bird watcher, and come fall and winter, I always tend to worry about the birds and their safety and their travels, so I loved the part of the book where the conversation took place between the rat and the birds. I'll read. It was snowing hard as I beat through the passes of the great mountains, and I had a stiff fight to win through. But never shall I forget that blissful feeling of the hot sun again on my back as I sped down to the lakes that lay so blue and placid below me, and the taste of my first fat insect. That changed my entire perspective on fall and winter for the birds. It was so fun to read that.
Oh, thank you, Lindsay.
Thank you, Lindsay.
And yes, I do like that scene from Wayfarer's All, I think.
Yes.
That's in
the swallow, isn't it?
Yes,
that tries to hold on and then in the end has to go. And I think there's a lot about how there's the animals actually really have to honour their own nature.
Yes.
That comes over very well in it, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. I agree. And of course, The Wind in the Willows is also a book that many of us discovered in childhood. And it's a book that you read to me, I'm sure, when I was little.
I did. And then you read it yourself not long after. But yes, I know. For me, I think I first discovered it when I was about 7. So I would have read it myself.
Yes.
Yeah.
But so it was really nice to hear from a mother and son duo, Christina and Aaron, who read The Wind in the Willows and sent us in a message together.
Hello, Donna and Miranda. This is Christina from Somerville, Massachusetts.
And this is Aaron.
Our favorite passage in The Wind in the Willows is when Mole reflects that he seems to have lost all interest for the time in the things that went to make up his daily life. For the time are the crucial words. We're folding up our blankets and getting out our picnic baskets. Then in autumn, we'll do the reverse. Altered days and doings energize and soothe our minds and bodies, keeping us alive to the world. The mole is our favorite character. Isn't that right, Aaron?
Yes.
Oh, thank you, Christina and Aaron.
Yes, thank you so much to you both. That's so cute, isn't it?
Yeah. Lovely to have heard from you both. And I think so often what makes a book such a timeless classic like this is that it appeals to so many generations.
Yes.
It's a real family story in that any generation of a family can read and enjoy it together.
Absolutely.
And I think that's something that's very special about The Wind in the Willows. But there's a real quintessential quality to it of being a real classic comfort read, and this was something that Jason spoke about in his message. So let's hear from Jason.
Hello, this is Jason from New Zealand. I shall always love rereading The Wind in the Willows, for it reminds us that true happiness comes from the simplest things: food, a snug bed, green places, the familiarity of home, and the glow of true friendship. In fact, if ever I need to find shelter from rain in my heart, I just have to open this book to know that Ratty and Mole will be waiting to take me rowing on the sun-dappled river for a picnic, that Badger will offer me his home a safe anchorage from the wild woods, and that even Pan, the friend and helper of natural life, will pipe a melody that will give me rest until I am found again. And when the story ends, the tale of a life full of summertime and the soothing sounds of the river, which Kenneth Grahame wrote and so hoped for his own son, will have made a difference. My troubles will be just some half-forgotten dream. Thank you, Miranda and Donna, for recommending this timeless tale of comfort.
Oh, thank you, Jason.
Yes, thank you so much, Jason. And you're so right, isn't he? That it's quintessentially a comfort book for so many people through the many decades too.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
so true. And oral storytelling is an important part of the history of The Wind in the Willows, because the book started out as really bedtime stories that Kenneth Grahame told to his son Alistair, who he nicknamed Mouse.
Yes.
And I was interested then to hear from some of the Comfort Book Club readers who spoke about how much they enjoyed actually listening to the book, and they chose to read it in the form of listening to an audiobook. So Victoria sent a message about how much she loved the audio version of The Wind in the Willows. So let's hear Victoria's message.
Hi, Donna and Miranda. It's Victoria in California. It's so good to be back with the Comfort Book Club. I enjoyed going to my local bookstore and looking at all the editions of The Wind and the Willows. I ended up segueing between the printed version and the audiobook. The narrator, Michael Hordern, is superb and has such a sonorous voice. I felt like I was right back in my grandfather's lap. My favorite chapter was chapter 5, where Mole returns to his beloved home and reunites with his carefully chosen possessions, including the portraits of Queen Victoria and Garibaldi. Thanks once again for this wonderful comfort read. I look forward to the next one. Bye-bye.
Oh, thank you, Victoria.
Thank you, Victoria.
And yes, I have that same audiobook version as well. And Michael Hordern is such a great narrator. I also love that Alan Bennett.
That's my favourite, I
version.
must admit, but it's abridged.
It's abridged,
isn't it?
which
Yeah.
is a pity,
Yeah.
because I love his voice
Yes.
as well.
Yes.
But Elizabeth also sent in a message about how much she enjoyed the audio version of The Wind in the Willows.
Hi Miranda, Donna and the rest of the Comfort Book Club. This is Elizabeth from England. Thank you so much for pushing me to reread such a wonderful childhood favourite. I was instantly taken back to warm summer afternoons on a swing. I listened to an audiobook version that was narrated by Michael Hordern, who was simply wonderful. He was able to adapt his voice so well to suit each individual character, I forgot he was the only person narrating at points. I do think I'd like to purchase an illustrated copy as well though, as having all the scenery and various outfits in picture form would be rather wonderful, particularly Toad dressed up as a washerwoman. Thank you again, and I look forward to next month's read.
Oh, thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Yes.
And yes, I think the illustrations really make The Wind in the Willows. I mean, I of course have this beautiful edition illustrated by Chris Dunn, which I think is a real modern classic edition of the book. The illustrations are so lovely and they add so much to the text. But I think the illustrations that people really think of when they think of The Wind in the Willows are these ones, the ones done by Ernest Shepherd. He really, I think, did the quintessential illustrations for The Wind in the Willows.
He managed to speak to Kenneth Grahame, didn't he?
Yes.
Just before he died, I think the year before.
Yes, very shortly before anyway.
Yes.
And Kenneth Grahame spoke to him. I think he said to him, treat these characters kindly. I love them.
Yes.
And also pointed out parts of the Thames near where he lived that Ernest Shepherd could draw inspiration from,
Absolutely.
quite literally.
Yes.
And I think that's the thing. So many of us may feel that we already know the story of The Wind in the Willows and even have a series of pictures in our heads about what the book is and the characters, even without ever having fully read it. And another reader of the Comfort Book Club, Emma, sent in a message that sort of touches on this, and she was surprised to realise that she'd never actually read a complete sort of unabridged version of The Wind in the Willows. So let's hear Emma's message.
Hi Miranda and Donna, my name's Emma and I'm from the UK. I was really excited about this month's book choice because I'm a big fan of The Wind in the Willows, but ironically enough, I've never read the book in its entirety. I had a beautiful illustrated edition as a child and I was charmed by the 80s stop-motion animation TV series that aired here in the UK, but I really needed to read the book from cover to cover. I don't think you can actually get a more comforting book, in all honesty. I got very strong Bramley Hedge vibes reading this. I loved reading about Ratty and Mole's leisurely summer days by the river, picnicking and punting, and their long evenings snug by the fireside. Kenneth Grahame's love of nature really comes through in this book, and the references to food and hearty eating certainly add to its comforting feel. I got through this book in a couple of sittings, curled up in bed with a candle and being transported to a bygone era of slow, rural comings and goings, punctuated by Toad's light-hearted escapades. I hope everyone else loved this book as much as I did. I know I'm so glad that the Comfort Book Club prodded me to finally getting to it. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Emma.
Thank you, Emma. I'm glad you finally sort of picked up the book as well, because it is different, isn't it?
It is, yes, yeah, and I'm so glad that you enjoyed it, and that sounds like such a cosy reading
It was lovely.
experience
I love the candle and
yeah,
up
that
in
sounds
bed. That
ideal.
wonderful.
And I was also really interested in Emma mentioning the Bramley Hedge book.
Yes, of course.
Because I think the legacy of The Wind in the Willows really comes out in books like the Bramley Hedge series.
Yes, absolutely.
Like the Little Grey Rabbit books by Alison Utley.
Yeah.
The BB books, the Little Grey Men books.
They've even got Pan.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And also Winnie the Pooh.
Yes.
And A.A. Milne was in fact a huge fan of The Wind in the Willows. And he adapted it even as a play, which Kenneth Grahame saw and really liked, which I think is lovely. And there's a quote by A.A. Milne about The Wind in the Willows being a book that is really a test of character. And I think it's a brilliant quote, so I wanted to share it with you. So A.A. Milne says, "One does not argue about the wind in the willows. The young man gives it to the girl with whom he is in love, and if she does not like it, asks her to return his letters. The older man tries it on his nephew and alters his will accordingly." I think that's brilliant, isn't it?
I love that. I think it's a brilliant quote.
Yeah.
But
I wanted to talk about the structure of The Wind in the Willows because it is very unusually structured.
Yes, it is. It is. I think he said something about it's like a clothesline, which he puts his bits on, and they're all connected through the line, but they're disparate bits of memories and experiences of his own.
Yes, when we talked about it, you said it was quite episodic.
Yeah, it's very episodic,
and I
isn't
think
it?
that's really true. It jumps from one moment in time to somewhere in the future by quite a bit. It kind of does make these leaps forward.
Yeah.
And also the idea of this going out and then returning home is really central to the book, and you can almost divide it into two halves. And the first half is really Mole's story.
Yes, it is.
About how he leaves home, goes out, has adventures, and then in the end returns to his home.
Yeah.
And then the second half is really Toad's story.
Yes.
And again, his story of how he leaves home and then at the end returns.
Yes.
And I think Toad's story especially shows that The Wind in the Willows is a bit of a parody on Homer's The Odyssey. Toad is a very different Odysseus.
Yes. I think he really appeals to children. I think he would be absolutely you know how kids love someone who's really naughty.
Yes.
Well, Toad's really naughty.
Yes, he is.
Yes.
So he goes off and has some rather unheroic adventures, which he is extremely naughty.
Yes.
You could see how children would love that.
Yeah.
But Kenneth Grahame makes it very clear by the name of the final chapter, which is the return of Ulysses, or Odysseus.
Yeah.
That this is a bit of a parody, and also why it's very important that both Mole and Toad return home.
Yes,
in the
absolutely.
end.
Yeah, and both Mole and Ratty love the idea of adventures. They continue to have them. I mean, he goes home, but he also in the end goes back to stay with Ratty again. But he always knows his home is there, Mole.
Yes, and in the end, he goes back to his own home
Absolutely.
too. That's such a lovely chapter in the book, the fifth chapter.
Yes,
with the Christmas scene as well,
yeah,
which is just so lovely. I think that's my very favourite chapter in the book. But also, Mole and Toad are two very different personalities. And they perhaps in some ways also represent two different sides to Kenneth Grahame himself. Toad is the rebel,
absolutely,
the nonconformist who has to be quite literally dragged by Badger and Ratty and Mole and really told by them to sort of do his bit. Whereas Mole is the conformist. And I think it was so interesting. I read this biography of Kenneth Grahame, Eternal Boy by Matthew Dennison, which I really recommend. And he wrote about how Kenneth Grahame really had these two sides to his personality. On the one hand, he was a very conventional, very conservative man who got a job as a clerk in the Bank of England and worked his way up to become secretary of the Bank of England. And he held on to that job.
Great responsibility too in that.
Yeah. And he held on to it even though he became a famous author before ever writing The Wind in the Willows. And he could have given it up, but he didn't. He made safe choices a lot in his life. So he had, on the one hand, a very conventional, very typically Victorian life and a Victorian outlook in many ways. But another side of his personality was incredibly imaginative. There was a longing in him, perhaps for escape sometimes.
Absolutely, you could feel that.
You could. I think that comes out in The Wind in the Willows.
And the way Ratty's so tempted by the story of the sailor rat.
Yes,
the water.
In fact, those two chapters kind of link these two sort of halves of the book, Mole's story and Toad's story. Those two chapters in the middle are very interesting, and I think they really speak to Kenneth Grahame's own preoccupations and interests. He was interested in the idea of rural paganism, and that's explored through the Piper of the Gates of Dawn chapter with Pan being in it. And it's such a poetic and beautiful chapter.
It really is.
And then Wayfarer's All really explores this idea of wanderlust and Ratty's desire to go south and escape the riverbank, but it is Mole in the end who battles with him and gets him to see sense. But it's almost like these two sides of a personality kind of warring together.
And Grahame himself was somebody, even as a bachelor, who loved to create cosy homes for himself, didn't he?
Yes. Because I think the history of the book is very interesting. In that it was told at first as a series of sort of bedtime stories, and then the second half was actually told in letter form. Kenneth Grahame sent letters to his son, a lot from Cornwall, which he loved. Kenneth Grahame loved Cornwall.
Yes, he did.
Messing about in the boats there was a big thing for him.
Yeah.
And this fabulous book, My Dearest Mouse, The Wind in the Willows Letters, is a lovely collection of the letters that Kenneth Grahame wrote. And I love seeing the kind of original letters in here.
Yeah.
And the headers of the different hotels in Cornwall that he was staying at, for instance. And I also like that links this a little bit to Peter Rabbit.
It does.
Which I'm sure was an influence
Absolutely.
On Grahame.
Yeah.
But Peter Rabbit started out as letters.
Yes.
And I love that it kind of has that link to The Wind in the Willows and its genesis.
Yes.
But then it was also an American publisher's agent, Constance Smedley, who was visiting the Grahames, trying to persuade him to write more, because he'd already written best-selling books, which were a collection of his short stories. And she overheard some of the stories.
Isn't that lovely?
That he told Mouse,
Yeah.
and then persuaded him to write them as a book. But I also find it really interesting that Toad was partly inspired by Kenneth Grahame's son.
Yes, in fact, that was a real part of it, wasn't it?
Yeah. A bit unfortunately in some ways, because I think that the parents very much spoilt their only child. And he was a bit of a puffed up and conceited young boy.
Yes.
And was like Toad in some rather negative ways.
Yeah.
And perhaps Toad was written as a bit of a warning lesson
Yes.
to him. I don't know. But sadly, it gave him a hard time at school later when he was recognised as the inspiration for Toad, and I think bullied terribly.
Yes.
Which was sad. And in talking about the origins of The Wind in the Willows, I think it's interesting too to address some common misconceptions about the book, one of which was that it was published as a children's book and kind of instantly became this children's classic. It wasn't written as a children's book, and it wasn't publicised as such at all either. Kenneth Grahame was known for having written very popular stories about children, but they were definitely adult short stories. And The Wind in the Willows, as well, I think why it appeals to so many generations is because its characters aren't children. They are definitely kind of middle-aged men for the most part.
I think so, definitely.
And even if they have childlike qualities to them, thinking of Toad in particular, they're not characters that are actually children.
No.
They are adult characters, and they have an outlook that very much appeals to adults as well as children.
Yeah.
And the book wasn't popular when it very first came out. But its popularity,
slow burner.
Yes, exactly. Its popularity grew because at first I think critics didn't know what to make of it. Yeah. They thought it was a very kind of odd adult book.
Yes.
But popularity definitely grew. And I think another misconception that people have before reading it sometimes is that it is a book about animals.
Yes.
And it's actually...
the way like something like Watership Down is considered. Yes, and that I think is definitely...
It is. Yes. Whereas The Wind in the Willows is really much more a book about humans.
Yeah.
And one of our readers, Sam, sent in a message saying how surprised she was that there were humans at all in the book. So let's hear Sam's message.
Hello, my name is Sam, and this is my first time participating in this book club. I was only passingly familiar with Wind in the Willows and knew it was about animals, so I was thoroughly surprised to see that human characters are part of the story. There is a special delight in every scene where Toad is mistaken for a washerwoman, though. I really, really love that.
Oh, thank you, Sam.
Yes, thank you, Sam, and welcome.
Yes, welcome. Yes. And yes, I love the
hilarious.
The scenes with toad, and also how he can just sort of put on the clothes and somehow that completely transforms his identity. And he is instantly mistaken for a washerwoman and not a toad. But yes, it's such a wonderfully imaginative book. But the characters, although they share some traits with animals, are for the most part really human.
Yes, they are.
And especially men. It's a very sort of male-dominated world. And it's a book that's very much about male friendship, male companionship, and the pleasures of a bachelor lifestyle.
Yes.
And it's significant, I think, that Kenneth Grahame wrote this after his own sort of disastrous marriage, which pretty much fell apart on his honeymoon.
Yes.
And the birth of his son, and his sort of ideal landscape that he kind of painted in The Wind in the Willows was of a world with hardly any women in it.
Yes.
In fact. And it also reminds me of books of that Edwardian society particularly Three Men in a Boat.
Oh yes, the language is quite similar in some ways, isn't it? Yes.
And also this idea of male camaraderie and men messing about in boats on the Thames.
Yes.
Just like in Jerome K. Jerome's book. And actually I read that Jerome K. Jerome was writing Three Men in a Boat when he was a neighbour of Kenneth Grahame.
Oh, how interesting.
Yeah, I read that they were neighbours. And so I think that Kenneth Grahame was definitely influenced by Three Men in a Boat.
I'm sure he definitely read it. I mean, I think Three Men in a Boat shows a much more clubbable men type experience. You get the feeling that Badger especially, but even to a certain extent, Toad and maybe Ratty and Mole, they're much more... They're quite individual. They live in their own world. So I mean, Ratty and Mole are good friends and stay together. But Badger's famed for being, somebody who sort of steps aside a bit from too much entertainment with others.
Yes, that's true. But the narrator of The Three Men in a Boat indulges in these sort of flights of fancy
in a similar
and
way.
Fantasy in a similar way to characters in The Wind in the Willows, especially maybe Ratty.
Yes.
And he's quite prone to quoting poetry, and this reminds me of The Wind in the Willows. A lot. And indeed the language of Kenneth Grahame in the writing of The Wind in the Willows is so beautiful.
It is.
So poetic. And another of our readers, Faith, sent in a message about how much she loved the poetic nature of the language. So let's hear Faith's message.
Hello, Miranda and Donna, and my fellow Comfort Book Club members. My name is Faith, and I live in London. What I love most about The Wind in the Willows is the poetry of the language. My favorite sentence in the book describes the river as a babbling procession of the best stories in the world, sent from the heart of the earth to be told at last to the insatiable sea. How gorgeous and evocative. Thank you for choosing such a lovely book for March. I read it on a sunny morning as the chestnut trees outside my window began to bud, and The Wind in the Willows will always remind me of the peace of that morning.
Oh, thank you, Faith.
Yes, thank you, Faith.
And how lovely that it will remind you of a beautiful time and a moment in nature.
Yes.
But yes, I agree that language is so poetic, and there's this theme of poetry and the restorative powers of language and of poetry that really runs through the book. I think it's so significant that Mole, when he helps Ratty overcome his wanderlust, gets him to sit down and to write, and he sort of sets out some paper and some pens and leaves Ratty to it, and in the end Ratty writes some poetry and feels much better.
Yes.
And this was also Madeleine's favourite scene in the book, so let's hear Madeleine's message.
Hi Miranda, hi Donna, I am Madeleine from Normandy. As a French reader, my main reference in stories with animals acting like humans is Les Fables de La Fontaine, because we used to learn it by heart at school. But here, it's a totally different mood. In chapter 9, the mole helped the rat to go back to reality by kindly giving to him pen and paper to write poetry. I was literally near to tears by reading these words. Sometimes you don't need to do a lot to be a good friend. You just have to put a kind and watchful eye on people you love. Thank you, Miranda, for this wonderful book.
Oh, thank you, Madeleine.
Thank you so much, Madeleine. Yes, and I love that because earlier Mole had been quite dismissive of Ratty's poetry, the DuckTales All, which I think is a wonderful poem myself. But both the ducks and Mole were like critics, I think, in Graham's eyes, who were like, oh no.
Yes.
I loved that bit too, but it's so nice when he changes it, and Mole actually is so generous as to think of that. And,
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder how much Kenneth Grahame himself found writing a balm and a sort of solace as well.
It does, doesn't it?
And he would really escape into a fantasy world. He had a very rich internal life that developed from childhood, which was quite unhappy. And I think he also really connected this inner imaginative life specifically with nature and with the natural world, and with being so deeply rooted and connected to the landscape. Place meant a great deal to him.
Huge, you can just tell.
Yeah, and I think that comes out in The Piper at the Gates of Dawn.
Definitely.
That chapter. And meeting Pan. But also this sense of nature and poetry and language being deeply restorative and coming to you when you are in need of help.
Absolutely. It's lovely that bit.
It is.
Yes.
And that chapter was a favourite of Heather's, so let's hear Heather's message.
Hello, Miranda and Donna and members of the Comfort Book Club. Hi, everyone. This is Heather from Maine. I tend to do the bulk of my reading in the very early morning hours, and so it happened that I found myself reading Chapter 7 titled The Piper at the Gates of Dawn during daybreak. The experience was wonderful. Graham's ethereal descriptions of sunrise, slowly illuminating the landscape, mirrored my own reality, and I felt as in awe as Rat and Mole must have felt when encountering the demigod Pan. Many versions, even if otherwise unadapted, leave out this chapter, but it is the heart of the story and incredibly beautiful. It is my favorite. Thank you, Miranda and Donna, for your lovely book choice.
Oh, thank you, Heather.
Yes, thank you, Heather.
And yes, you're right. The Piper at the Gates of Dawn and Wayfarers All are generally always left out of the books that are edited really for children. And I think that's because they do deal with adult preoccupations.
Yes, I think you're right there.
Much more. I mean, we've spoken before about how Wayfarers All really deals with wanderlust and also this sense of escape and freedom, which Kenneth Grahame definitely saw. I mean, he saw his own father kind of flee Scotland in the end and settle in France, and he himself wanted so much to go to Oxford University, but instead had to sort of agree to his uncle's wishes and get a job as a clerk instead in the Bank of England. And we've talked about these two sides of his personality kind of warring together, but I think his love of the bohemian lifestyle did come out for sure in his own life, and he himself loved the South and went to Italy a lot. And I thought it was wonderful that we heard from two readers in Italy about The Wind in the Willows. So let's hear from our readers in the South. Let's hear Silvia's message first.
Hello, Miranda and Donna, and to all the members of the Comfort Book Club. I'm Silvia from Italy. The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame. What a treat! Now I envy all the English kids that read this novel at young age. It is the perfect story to learn the warmth and beauty of friendship, the importance of loyalty. Friends stay friends no matter what. I like it. How the houses are really homes for every one of the characters. like fairy tale castle in which you and your friend are always safe and content. Above all, the languages, like poetry, especially in the description of nature. Thank you very much for the opportunity to read and discuss these lovely books, and for all the work you put in this amazing channel.
Oh, thank you very much, Silvia.
Thank you, Silvia. And yes, there's the Garibaldi statue, isn't there, at Moles, which I always think is a lovely little nod to Italy
Yes,
there.
definitely.
Yes.
But yes, and I so agree. It's such a wonderful testament to friendship. And also, I love how hospitable all of the characters are, always inviting each other into their homes, like you say. And Laura, another of our readers from Italy, spoke about how much she loved the interiors and the homes of the characters. So let's hear Laura's message.
Hello, Miranda. Hello, Donna. This is Laura from Italy. I read The Wind in the Willows many, many years ago, and I truly liked it. But reading it again has helped me understand why I loved it so much. I think it is because of the way the idea of home is present throughout the story. Home is a safe place where you can be yourself. I particularly enjoyed the description of Badger's house in chapter 4, so cozy, so warm. I adore the lines about the ruddy brick floor that smiled up at the smoky ceiling, the oaken settles that exchange cheerful glances with each other. Also, the passage in which Mole comes across the smell of his home is very sweet and moving.
Oh, thank you, Laura.
Thank you, Laura. Yeah, I love that bit too.
Oh, yes.
Yes, yes.
And homes are so important.
It is, and doesn't that bit remind you of Alison Utley's The Country Child, where the oak and the settle smile at each other in the wind and the willows? And yeah, you know, they're almost animated,
they
the
are.
furniture
Yes,
in
they
Badgers.
are.
Yeah.
And I love that as well.
Yeah.
And I think Kenneth Grahame, as a child, had a real yearning for security at home, which he didn't really have. He and his siblings were essentially orphans, brought up by relatives who weren't perhaps particularly loving. And he grew up to really cherish the idea of home and a very comfortable domestic interior.
Yes.
And he created for himself very cozy sounding sort of bachelor pads in London, which I love. And he was also quite a collector. He collected a lot of ceramics and he liked to have beautiful things around him. And there's a lovely description in his biography of him buying this special desk that perhaps had been the Duke of Wellington's desk off the Portobello Road and bringing it to his flat in Chelsea.
How lovely.
Yeah, I thought that was marvellous. And yes, I just love all of the descriptions of different homes in the book. And as I've said already, I think Moles is my favourite.
I know.
Although I love Badgers as
Yes,
well.
yes.
But another reader, Marie, sent in a message about how much she loved the description of Mole's home. So let's hear Marie's message.
Hello, Miranda and Donna. This is Marie calling from Prince Edward Island. It was lovely to return to the classic tale of The Wind in the Willows and Kenneth Grahame's beautiful prose which paints the most vivid pictures. My favourite part is Mole's return to Mole End, the home he abandoned when he first found the river. How his face beamed at the sight of his possessions and Rat's praise of his little house. The visit of the carol-singing field mice reminded him how much home meant to him and how it was an anchorage in his existence, a feeling that we can all relate to. This book is absolutely wonderful. Thank you for choosing it as the Comfort Book Club's Book of the Month.
Oh, thank you, Marie.
Yes, thank you so much, Marie.
So glad you enjoyed reading along with us. And yes, I love all the domestic details and connected to domesticity. I love the descriptions of food.
Me too.
They're just incredible.
They are.
They
really
the
are.
Picnic.
That picnic is amazing. The way that all the words are strung together.
Yes, it's just so fabulous.
Yeah.
And another of our listeners, Beth, said that one of her very favourite scenes was when Toad eats that incredible sounding buttered toast, which I love too. But let's hear Beth's message.
Hi, Miranda and Donna. I'm Beth from Illinois in the United States. I've so enjoyed reading along with the Comfort Book Club this year. Wind in the Willows has been such a delight. I'm especially enthralled by the beautiful language and the gorgeous descriptions in this book. My absolute favorite is the description of the hot buttered toast that Toad enjoys while he's in prison. It just sounds so yummy and a whole experience in itself. Among my other favorites are the description of the river when Mole first discovers it, as well as Mole's snug little home when he and the rat go there for an evening. I've been relishing Kenneth Grahame's use of words. Thank you so much for hosting this delightful book club and for your beautiful videos. They really are a joy.
Oh, thank you so much,
Beth.
Beth.
Thank you.
That's very kind. And yes, that's just a wonderful scene. And again, I think it's interesting when you contrast Toad's adventures in the second half to Mole's adventures in the first half, and you contrast their experiences of food in both their stories.
Yes.
I think that's really interesting too, because again, Mole is shown as the conventional one. You know, he has these meals either in this carefully packed picnic or in these cozy interiors.
Yes,
with
and
his
he
friends.
takes great care to get enough food for everybody, and Ratty helps him.
Exactly. Yes.
It's lovely.
Whereas with Toad, there is eating buttered toast in jail.
The killer's daughter very kindly brings it into it.
Yes. And then he enjoys this incredible stew that has been made of game, essentially stolen. And the food that he tucks into the toast and the stew is described in such a sensual way.
It
isn't
is.
it? There's just such relish about it.
It is.
But the contrast between the two animals, again, I think points to this rebellious character on the one hand, and then the conforming character on the other.
Yeah.
And I think that is very well done. But yes, even though when I read the biography of Kenneth Grahame, I realised that there was a lot of sadness to his story. And The Wind in the Willows would never have been written if his life had been happier, perhaps.
No, I agree.
And although it was sad to read that, and that the story that started out as a story told to his son later died very tragically.
Yes, I think they think it was probably a suicide.
So there was a lot of tragedy in Kenneth Grahame's life. Yeah. But what I take away as the key sort of core message to The Wind in the Willows is that it's very much a book about the joy of living.
It is.
That's really what the characters do.
Yes.
And they do it very well.
Very well.
They take such joy in simply living.
And you really go along with them and enjoy it, whether it's Mole or if it's Toad.
Yes,
both
or Ratty, or even Badger. You do. And I think that, again, Kenneth Grahame shows how much pleasure that you get from living in wonder, living in awe. He was able to retain some of that childlike wonderment of when you look at the natural world. And I think that's really an important lesson for all of us, is to try and have a bit more of that inner child, that ability to look at the world around us with awe and with appreciation, and take that very simple joy in living. And that's really what I take away from The Wind in the Willows, and why it's such a comfort read.
Yes.
But thank you again to all of you who read along with us.
Thank you so much.
And do let us know in the comments as well what you thought of the book. I forgot to read I forgot to bring down next month's choice, but I've already said Sense and Sensibility is the April choice, and I'm also announcing May's choice, which is The Blue Castle by Ellen Montgomery. I'm excited. This will be the first Ellen Montgomery that we've done for the Comfort Book Club.
First Canadian.
Yes, so that will be lovely. So I will be updating the Comfort Book Club page on my website. And also, it's so wonderful that lots of people now generally want to contribute a voice message, but I have to say it makes my job much harder to fit so many messages in, and it makes it harder to have a neater, kind of more condensed discussion. So what I'm going to do going forward is I'm going to cap the contributor number at 8. So I will keep putting the deadlines for giving me a voice message contribution. I will put the deadlines still on the website, but once I get 8 contributors, then I will put up a message that I'm no longer taking more. So if I don't get 8, the deadline will continue. But once I get 8, then I will just cap it. And this is the easiest way for me to deal with it. I don't want to be picking and choosing favorites out of ones sent to me.
And they're all wonderful.
Exactly, they are all wonderful. So I will just, once I get 8, then I'll cut it there. And I think that's the best way moving forward.
Check that before you send it.
Check before you send it. Look on the website, because I will say if I have had my 8 contributors and don't need any more. So check there first. But yes, thank you so much for watching, for joining in. Extra big thanks to those of you who pressed the super thanks button on my last video. Really appreciate your support, but I appreciate the likes and the comments and just the people who watch my video, of course, as well. And I hope you have a wonderful weekend ahead. I'll see you again very soon. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.